Extra history, Saipan. Shout out to John Ross 44, bro. Thanks again, bro. These videos are hella cool.
D-Day. The ramp drops, signaling the start of an invasion that will determine the fate of the war. In the next hour, 8,000 American troops will hit the beach. Many in the first wave will die.
Damn.
But when the ramp drops, what emerges isn't an infantry platoon. It's a line of amphibious tanks. And the target of this D-Day isn't Normandy, it's Saipan. PC. An engine roars. An amphibious vehicle lurches down the ramp and drops into the sea, chugging forward. It's slow and heavy, this converted transport. Light armor plates weigh it down, and a stubby 75mm cannon thrusts out of its open-topped turret. The crew looks back to see a line of their fellow landing vehicles, LVTs, plunging into the sea each time a wave swells beneath the landing ship. One misjudges and drives into a wave trough. It drops 20 feet and splashes down like a brick, sunk with all hands. The crew winces. Each vehicle has 24 men aboard. The Marines have nicknamed them Amtraks, amphibious tractors. Cannon-armed hardened Amtraks like the one this crew drives are an Am-Tank. The Am-Tank plows towards Saipan, churning the rough water. The crew sees flashes on the mountain. Japanese artillery. Shells throw waterspouts 20 feet high. An LVT behind them disintegrates. "Hold on!" the driver screams. He downshifts. Treads bite coral and the Am-Tank lurches up on the reef. For a heart-stopping moment, it feels like they'll go over backward.
Oh, nah.
But then they're onto the shelf, moving faster but exposed. Mortars drop around them. Machine gun bullets ping off the front armor. The Am-Tank next to them explodes. Then they drop into the calm lagoon. The crew clenches their teeth, thinking of what's ahead for the Marines in the transport behind.
I thought he just said, the crew clenches their cheeks. I was like, bro.
First the beach, then the brush. Then the towns, sugarcane fields, and caves. Only then could they climb that mountain and silence the artillery. The fighting was expected to be so close, some Marines were carrying shotguns. The Amtrak transports are supposed to advance 1,000 yards inland today. But for that to happen, the lead Am tanks need to assault the enemy emplacements on the beach. They begin to fire. The crew hears the shifting grind of sand. The Am tank lurches onto the shore and up to the tree line. Machine gun bullets ping its turret armor and zip through the hull. The gunner rotates the turret and answers with a shell, cracking the pillbox open. He glimpses a Japanese light tank through the trees, then the nose of the Am tank plunges forward.
Oh no.
Stuck, its rear in the air. An anti-tank ditch. The crew grabs their rifles and bails. From now on, they're infantry. For the first time in the war, Americans have landed on Japanese soil. This battle would decide the fate of the Pacific War. That's what they'd been told in the briefing, and it was no lie. Saipan was the most heavily fortified of the northern Mariana Islands and had been Japanese territory since 1919. But it wasn't the island's sugarcane industry America was after. It was their airfields. Because a B-29 superfortress launched from Saipan could strike the Japanese homeland, opening it to the kind of sustained strategic bombing that was currently pounding Germany. And so, the US had sent an enormous fleet to invade an island that was only 12 miles long and 5 across. And on the other side of the beaches, concealed in brush, emplacements, and caves, the soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy knew exactly why these Americans had come. Their commander, Lieutenant General Saito Yoshitsugu, had made that clear. Saipan was home soil for them, for some quite literally. Soldiers that spent time there tended to marry into the Japanese settler families, and even those whose families lay far away in Japan knew that this battle was to defend their loved ones from American bombs. But they're understrength and under-equipped. American submarines had sunk whole convoys full of reinforcements, weapons, and construction materials meant to harden Saipan. But that was too late to worry about now. Now their plan is to attack. Pound these Marines with artillery, then counterattack and push them into the sea. If that failed, they would go inland and defend every inch of ground to the death. The 2nd Marine Division is doing badly. Japanese artillery had waited until the Marines, disordered by currents and incoming fire, had stacked up on the congested shore before opening up. Their thin-skinned Amtraks have turned into easy targets, and some have abandoned them even before reaching shore. Units are disoriented and mixed together. Japanese snipers kill officers left and right. By the end of the day, 5 of the 7 battalions in the 2nd Marines have lost their commander.
Damn!
Some units suffer 35% casualties. Swamped in blood, flying sand, and burning tanks, Marines form ad hoc fire teams to push forward into the machine gun and sniper fire. They scratch foxholes in the sand to shield themselves from mortars. Between them, AM tanks duel with Japanese Type 95s. Then, the counter-thrust hits their lines. Down the coast, the 4th Marines are doing better. Their landings haven't stacked up, and Amtraks are able to push hundreds of yards inland. Some stop to evacuate native Chamorro Islanders. But the narrow roads force the Amtraks and Amtanks to drive single file. Easy prey for artillery, tanks, and mortars. Lines of burning Amtraks choke the roads as they make their way towards the sugar refining town of Chiran, Kanoa. By nightfall, it's clear no one will make their first day objective.
Snack?
The Marines have taken over 2,000 casualties by sundown. Over 20 Amtraks have gone down in the assault, with one armored platoon suffering 40% losses. The Marines begin a fitful night. Each 2-man foxhole team taking turns napping while the other watches for the black-painted infiltrators that sometimes slip behind the lines with knives. They're awakened by a scream. Bonsai! Bonsai! General Saito's counterattack has arrived. Soldiers charge out of the darkness, waving swords and firing pistols and submachine guns. Some leap into Marine foxholes, guns blazing and bayonets fixed. Japanese tanks rev towards the beachhead. Machine gunners decimate the incoming attackers. The USS California, wounded at Pearl Harbor, drops artillery in support. The Marines repulse the charge under the white glow of Naval Star shells. 700 Japanese soldiers die in the determined but futile assault. With that, D-Day ended on Saipan. But despite the brutality of the first day's fighting, 20,000 Marines are now ashore. Some of them are code talkers, Navajo radio men recruited off the reservations who speak an unbreakable cipher based on their own language. Throughout the battle, they'll help direct naval gunfire and relay secret orders. And crucially, the Shermans arrive. Throughout the second day, the tanks pushed forward, neutralizing artillery encampments and machine guns, though not without losses. When one Sherman was immobilized, its commander, Gunnery Sergeant Robert McCard, remained inside directing fire.
Damn.
Nearly overrun, he ordered his crew to evacuate. He lobbed grenades to cover their retreat, then dismounted with the tank's machine gun to hold off the oncoming attack.
Damn.
He received a posthumous Medal of Honor.
Damn.
By the end of day 2, there had been hard
Did he live? Like, bro, they can't just leave me on a cliffhanger like that.
progress, and the exhausted Americans settled in for another watchful night. Then, at 03:30, the Marines heard engines. The men of the Imperial Japanese Army's 9th Tank Regiment raced down from the foothills of the mountain. They've received an order from Tokyo. The fate of the Japanese Empire rests in their hands. They must destroy the enemy. Their commander has promised to defend this bulwark of the Pacific if it costs 10,000 deaths. And so the 9th Regiment has scratched up every tank it can find to drive a wedge in the American beachhead. 37 tanks, Type 97 mediums in the lead, Type 95s follow. Infantry squads ride on their backs and charge behind. They power forward into U.S. machine gun and artillery fire, running directly over Marine foxholes and in among their lines.
Oh my God.
But the 6th Marines are ready. They survived a tank assault the night before. Fearing it would happen again, they requested backup. Shermans and half-tracks surge forward to meet the attack. Cannons light up the night, but the infantry will decide this battle. As the first Type 97 runs over a Marine foxhole, the men inside duck as it passes overhead, then emerge with the long tube of a bazooka. They put a round in its weak rear armor. When it slews to a stop, flaming, they hunt for another target. Marine bazookas fire point blank, holding tanks with each round. The line descends into anarchy as armor, infantry, and artillery fight a 360-degree brawl, lit by the fires of burning vehicles. And as each wave of tanks goes down, more emerge from the shadows. Confused by the smoke and the swirl of combat, Japanese crews keep opening their hatches to get their bearings. When they do, Marines leap onto the tanks, shooting the exposed men and shoving incendiary grenades into the open hatches. Within 45 minutes, the 6th Marines have destroyed 24 tanks, with 5 others falling to neighboring units. As the sun begins to rise, they realize they've just stopped the largest Japanese tank assault of the war and wiped out the majority of Imperial armor on Saipan. But there was no celebration. The next morning, the Marines pushed forward again, through waist-deep swamps and cane fields. They entered the shell-wrecked town of Chiran Kanoa, fighting house to house, shotgun against bayonet. And the next morning, they looked back to find an empty ocean. The Navy was gone. Rumors spread that the fleet had abandoned them. Now it was just 2 armies, fighting chest to chest, on an island 5 miles wide. 1944, USS Lexington. The radio man sits, sweating into his earphones. Contrary to rumor on Saipan, the Navy had not abandoned the Marines. They'd received reports of carriers closing in, a Japanese fleet coming to smash the Navy's task force and strand the troops ashore. A wave of dive bombers is headed towards Lexington. Hellcat fighters are scrambling to intercept. The radio man waits for contact. A scream in his earphones. "Scratch 1 bomber," a pilot crows. More screams.
What's
Men
my
yip,
favorite dessert?
cheer, and count kills. "Splash number 6," the same pilot calls. He's become an ace in 8 minutes.
Root beer floats.
And he's not the only one. By the end of the day, the Hellcats have destroyed the
Root
core of
beer
Japan's air
floats, my
power in
nigga.
the Pacific. Officially, this is the Battle of the Philippine Sea, but the pilots will call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. This series is brought to you by Forager. First Mobile Fleet lost 3 carriers to American aircraft and submarines, and nearly all of their veteran pilots. The survivors turned back towards Okinawa, their mission to relieve Saipan a failure. The threat at sea was over, but on land the battle raged. The Japanese defenders were tenacious, and the US progressed slow. With the tank offensive a failure and their rescue fleet smashed, Lieutenant General Saito ordered troops to withdraw inland and defend every position to the death, using terrain to their advantage. Marines die in valley ambush where Japanese troops hold the ridges. Furious at their lack of progress, after 5 days, the invasion's commander, Marine General Holland Howlin' Mad Smith, fires the army commander and pushes them on, regardless of mounting casualties. As the Saipan invasion, estimated to take 3 days, drags on into its 2nd week, both American and Japanese forces become more ruthless. Governments on both sides bombard their troops with propaganda, dehumanizing the enemy. Japanese commanders describe Americans as bloodthirsty devils and barbarians. American officers refer to the Japanese with racial slurs and speak in terms of extermination. There's little mercy. Japanese military ethos stigmatizes surrender, and commanders spread rumors that Americans torture and eat prisoners. Americans, for their part, know about the death marches and executions in the Philippines. As a result, surrender is both rarely offered and rarely accepted. Tragically, civilians sheltered in caves and fortifications are often caught in the middle of combat. Told that Americans will torture them if they're captured, hundreds instead decide to take their own lives, jumping off cliffs en masse. American translators beg via bullhorn to stop, saying they've set up refugee camps, but it's no use. In some minds, it's evidence that the Japanese cannot be reasoned with. But one man thinks he can get through. Marine Scout Guy Gabaldon had a unique background. Things had been rough growing up as a Mexican-American kid in Los Angeles. But when things hit bottom, a school friend named Lane Nakano had brought him home. Soon he was living with the Nakanos, learning Japanese. They'd practically raised him. Now, his adopted family was in an internment camp, and Lane was in Europe fighting with the 442nd. Gabaldon can't believe that these enemies are as unthinking and inhuman as his officers claim. So one night, on guard duty, he walks into the jungle alone. He returns that morning with 2 Japanese soldiers he'd convinced to surrender. His commander is furious. Only an idiot would desert his post like that. As punishment, he gives Gabaldon another overnight shift. But that night, Gabaldon drops his rifle and walks off again. This time, he comes back with 50 people, soldiers and civilians. This time, instead of punishing him, the commander makes it Gabaldon's new job. So night after night, Gabaldon crawls into enemy territory, armed with nothing but candy, food, his voice, and a...
Oh no, he's a whole... Who else hunts for people using candy? Come on, man. Can you imagine that shit though? Like, your enemy, someone that's been killing your people walks up. Look, I got chocolate, pig feet, duck, hot dog, and they believe him and go. Like, that's the shit that you gotta be careful of, man.
Territory, armed with nothing but candy, food, his voice, and a sack of grenades in case of emergency. He walks up to campfires and makes friends, goes into caves, and night after night, he brings back...
You know how many females he probably smashed on the way there? Hey, look, just turn around and eat this candy. I'll be done in seconds. It won't take long. Don't tell nobody.
More people. Guy Gabaldon, the Pied Piper of Saipan, convinced over 1,000 soldiers and civilians to surrender to US forces. In doing so, he almost certainly saved their lives, because Lieutenant General Saito was planning a yukusai. Saito's forces had reached a critical point. His troops are foraging leaves and snails for sustenance. Medicine and ammunition are nearly gone, and he's running out of men. There's only 7,000 left. And thanks to the US Navy, there would be no rescue. Saito had ordered bonsai charges since the first day of the invasion, but a yukusai was different. It came directly from the Emperor, a mandate for every man, even the wounded and unarmed, to attack without fear.
Damn, even if you ain't got no arms, you gotta attack without fear. What, you gonna threaten to kick him?
He gives the order by radio. Those too injured to fight will commit suicide. Anyone left has a simple directive. Attack before dawn. Kill 7 Americans before you fall. He swears to advance with them and leave his bones on Saipan, the bulwark of the Pacific. But despite his message, Saito will not advance. He's too old, too valuable if taken alive. Instead, he eats a meal of crab meat and sake with his friend, Admiral Nagumo, who'd overseen the Pearl Harbor attack. Afterward, both commit suicide. As Saito and Nagumo share their final meal, the rank-and-file troops drink their last supply of sake and beer and talk about what tomorrow will bring. There's no hope of success, but dying in glory is better than being huddled in caves and waiting for the flamethrowers. Near dawn, they pick up anything they can find. Rifles, grenades, knives,
glizzies. Just got a big hot dog.
Pistols, swords. Some carry makeshift spears made from bamboo and bayonets. Then they charge the American lines in the largest and final bonsai attack of the war. Machine gun bullets rip through them. Those without weapons snatch them from dying comrades. They break over the 27th Infantry Division's front line and rush through the gaps between battalions. So many enemies are rushing the American line, there's no need to aim. Troops can fire blind and still hit the charging men.
Damn.
Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, the commander of the 27th 1st Battalion, 105th Regiment, walks up and down, shouting for his men to hold, firing Colts in each hand.
Yep.
Wounded and out of ammunition, he's last seen manning a Jeep's machine gun. When they find his body the next day, it's discovered that he died out of ammunition defending himself with a Japanese saber. They've broken the perimeter. 2 battalions of the 27th are overrun. Behind the lines, Captain Ben Solomon, a dentist at home, now regimental surgeon, is at his aid station trying to stop wounded men from bleeding to death. He hears a shout and turns to see a Japanese soldier bayoneting one of his patients. Though not trained for combat, he shoots the soldier and charges into the fray with 4 Japanese troops following him. He yells to evacuate. As his patients limp out, Solomon slides into a foxhole. There's a machine gun there. The crew are dead. He holds the machine gun nest until he's overrun, stalling the assault long enough for his patients to escape.
Damn.
But not all the wounded make it. When 2 men die trying to carry Sergeant Thomas Baker to the rear, he refuses to be moved again. The veteran, known for his courage under fire, asks only to be propped up against a tree with a cigarette and a pistol.
I can see that being me, bro. If I see 2 of my homies die from carrying me out of battle, give me a pistol and a blunt, bro. I'm taking people with me. Even worse, I'ma play dead. I'm an actor, nigga. I'ma be asleep. I see somebody walking by, ba 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 ba. Like, that's how we do in the hood. You know what I'm saying? Like, all right.
He will be found there later, gun empty, cigarette burned out,
Yep.
surrounded by enemy dead.
Yep.
O'Brien, Solomon, and Baker would never go home.
Nigga.
Their families received the Medal of Honor instead. Swamped and nearly out of ammunition, parts of the 27th Infantry begin
for real,
rushing
for real,
backward,
Himalayas.
fighting as they run. Cooks and clerks at HQ sections in the rear grab rifles to hold pockets of territory, islands in a bloody stream. Indeed, the Japanese have finally achieved their aim of driving the Americans into the sea. Around 75 soldiers take to the water, swimming out to a reef 100 yards offshore for safety. Others establish thin secondary perimeters on the beach and hold until reinforcements clear the sector. The Yuksai was over, but it achieved its aim of shock and terror. The attack had nearly wiped out 2 U.S. Army battalions. That morning, the 2 battalions had a combined strength of 1,107 men. By nightfall, 400 were dead and 500 wounded, an 80% casualty rate from just one attack. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers had died in the desperate assault. It was over. Surveying the carnage, Captain Oba Sakai knew Japanese resistance on Saipan was broken. Fearing for his medical company and the island's civilians, he scratched together a group of survivors and took to the mountains. They remained there, fighting a guerrilla war until his commander convinced him to surrender, 3 months after the war had ended. Victory on Saipan had immediate consequences. General Tojo Hideki resigned as prime minister, and the Japanese government accepted that victory was no longer possible. But they fought on, hoping to prevent an invasion of the homeland and removal of the emperor. With Saipan taken, Americans secured the rest of the Marianas chain, taking Tinian, Guam, and their valuable airstrips. When American bombers flattened Japanese cities and burned Tokyo, they would do so from airfields in the Marianas. And 1 year after the fighting concluded on Saipan, a lone B-29 bomber lifted off from Tinian Airfield. Overnight, MPs had kept troops away from the aircraft and its odd, specially built loading pit. The B-29 hit its rendezvous point, then turned towards Hiroshima.